On paper, rescuing animals almost always seems like the right thing to do. Dogs and house cats, for example, usually don't survive without human support, and we have a natural inclination towards wanting to take them in. However, there are other animals, like wild ones, that may be a bit trickier to save. And often, we don't even think that they need our help. Sure, it's always great to lend a hand, but is it our place to interfere with Mother Nature? When one man stumbled upon a baby squirrel in need, however, it wasn't even a question. He took in the freezing squirrel, and what followed was pure magic. You don't need to be a parent to know that babies of any species can't survive on their own without support. Most of the time, you can count on their parents to take care of them in their own special way. But when baby animals are orphaned, it can be a bit tricky. Photographer Nick Radford was shooting photos in a wooded area when he found a tiny squirrel freezing in the cold. Knowing the little guy would surely die if left alone to brave the elements, he decided to take him home so he could nurse him back to health. The tiny squirrel was curled up and not moving. Worried, Nick gently placed the squirrel in the cup holder of his car, which he lined with the hood of his jacket for extra warmth and comfort. Nick decided to name the squirrel Apple Moonbeam, and once they both arrived at his home, he created a cozy bed for his adorable new friend, using little more than a heating pad and paper towels. Tiny Apple Moonbeam immediately fell in love with his new home, which must have seemed like just about everything that an animal in his position could possibly need. Look how cozy he is. Apple Moonbeam's first feeding was a delicate procedure. Because the poor squirrel was so tiny and young, not to mention he had been through so much, even the simplest things had to be done extremely carefully. Apple Moonbeam's eyes were still closed as his body responded to the shock that he had suffered from freezing so long. Hypothermia is not the kind of thing anyone recovers from easily, especially a tiny defenseless creature. Once the little squirrel seemed to be recovering, and once Nick felt like the little guy was finally ready, it was time for him to be introduced to the rest of his home and his adoptive family. They were already very much recognizable as a family unit, with every person and animal in the house loving, caring for, and being affectionate toward each other. Apple Moonbeam would fit in perfectly, Nick hoped anyway. Any concerns Nick had about Apple Moonbeam fitting in were allayed quickly. Nick and his dogs had a special connection, and they naturally seemed to be willing to add someone else special to their lives. It wasn't long after the initial meeting that the furry little fellow was promptly accepted as a fully fledged member of the pack. For the whole family, things would never be the same again. You can see just how close the bond was between Apple Moonbeam and Nick's dogs. This friendship might have seemed a little far-fetched, but once you actually look at them together, it was quite natural. With no trees inside the house to climb on, the growing squirrel had to use whatever resources he could find to get from place to place, and his new siblings were more than happy to help. Just look at the adorable little guy. Of course, it shouldn't be forgotten that squirrels are not domesticated animals, and therefore are not meant to be kept as pets. Still, he clearly needed the support. Everything seemed to work out quite well though, because just as Apple Moonbeam warmed up in Nick's home, he also warmed up to his new surroundings and new family. Can you see him down there? It was incredible to see the way that Apple Moonbeam and his new dog brother were spending time together. They really seemed like a natural pair, and surely they'd stay that way for years to come. These two animals might not have seemed like they'd be such a good match, especially when you consider how most dogs love chasing squirrels around the park whenever they get the opportunity. These two species actually had a bit more in common than you may think. They were both mammals after all, and if you caught them at the right moment, they were bursting with energy. Not only was Apple Moonbeam's life saved, but he was living the best life that a squirrel could have under such unusual circumstances. Plus, he seemed to be making everyone around him happy too. Taking care of a pet, whether it's a dog, cat, fish, or even a squirrel, can be difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. But when you have an animal in your home who brightens your life, it's all worth it. Only a day after little Apple Moonbeam opened his eyes, he became an internet sensation. It's easy to see why. Who doesn't love seeing a precious animal get a new lease on life?